October 8th, 1976, 2:50 in the afternoon. Forney Ridge Trail, Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It's drizzling, low 40s, the fog sitting on the ridgeline like a wet blanket. Now, a group of teenagers are hiking single file on a narrow trail. They're headed back to a school bus that's parked about 3/4 of a mile ahead. They're cold. They're tired. Some of them are sitting on the side of the trail taking a break, but one of them isn't stopping. It's a 16-year-old girl named Trenny Gibson. She's walking past them like she's got somewhere to be. Fast, determined. One of her classmates later said that she was walking like she was on a mission. She passes Scott Troy, Anita Rounds. They ask her to stop and rest. She doesn't want to. She keeps going. They watch her. She walks maybe 20 more yards, then stops. She bends down, turns to the right, steps off the trail. Now, Anita looks away for a second. Another kid's coming up behind her. She turns back. Trenny's gone. And not down the trail or behind a tree. She's just gone. Now, they don't panic because they figure she must have taken a shortcut. She'll be at the bus. But she wasn't. She never made it. 38 students from Bearden High School in Knoxville, Tennessee walked into the Great Smoky Mountains that Friday afternoon on a field trip. 37 came back. The 38th, a shy, quiet junior with brown hair, green eyes, and a $600 sapphire ring on her finger, she's never been seen again. It's been 49 years. They sent 756 people to find her. Bloodhounds, German shepherds, Army helicopters from Fort Campbell. The FBI searched 15 square miles on a half-mile grid for 3 weeks straight, and they found absolutely nothing. Not a trace. But the dogs, they found something. 3 separate tracking teams working independently followed Trenny's scent off the trail through the woods, past Klingham's Dome Tower, down the Appalachian Trail to a road near an overflow parking lot. And there, the scent stopped, right at the road. So she didn't get lost in the woods. She probably didn't fall off a cliff or die of exposure. Trenny Gibson left that park in a vehicle. So saith the dogs, those 3 separate teams. The FBI agreed. They told the press they didn't believe she was in the mountains. So if she left in a car, whose car? And why hasn't she been seen since? Well, the boy who was last seen alone with her that day, who said he stayed behind the summit to track a bear, unarmed, in the rain, on a school field trip, yeah, that guy wouldn't talk to investigators. He showed up at her family's house afterward and started screening their phone calls. And when Trenny's brother came home from the Navy and stayed the night with him, he noticed deep scratch marks running down the boy's thighs. Vertical scratches, the kinds fingernails make. The boy said it was from walking through the brush, but his pants didn't have marks on them. Curious. That boy's father was the assistant United States attorney for the district. It's a federal official with authority over federal lands. And the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, the place where Trenny vanished, that's federal land. The FBI was told to investigate. The family went to them with names, evidence, their own suspicions, and the FBI told the family of a missing 16-year-old girl that the primary suspect was, and this is a direct quote, too young to question. 49 years later, no arrest, no charges, no body. The FBI still won't release the full file on the case. But here's the thing. People talk. Not always to investigators, but they talk. A girl at a basketball game a few months after Trenny disappeared was asked by a stranger if they ever found out what happened to that missing girl from Bearden. And the girl looked at him and said, she was dead a half hour after she went missing. Then she turned around and walked away. Somebody at Bearden High School in Knoxville, Tennessee knows exactly what happened to Trenny Gibson. More than one somebody, and for half a century they've kept their mouths shut while a mother spent the rest of her life praying for an answer she never got. Tonight we're gonna lay out everything. Every suspect, every lie, every piece of evidence the FBI didn't want you to see. And by the end of this, you're going to understand why a 16-year-old girl vanished in broad daylight surrounded by 37 of her classmates and how the people who did it got away with it. I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History. This is the story of Trenny Gibson and the field trip. So before we get into the suspects and the cover-up and the FBI file that nobody's allowed to see, we should talk about who Trenny Gibson was, because the story only works if you understand this girl, what her life looked like, what she had going for her, and why the idea that she just ran away never made sense to anyone who actually knew her. Teresa Lynn Gibson, Trenny, to everyone who knew her, was born on August 17, 1960 in Fulton County, Georgia. Her father, Robert Gibson Sr., was a traveling salesman for a large chemical company. The job moved the family around, and by the late 60s, they landed in Knoxville, Tennessee. And honestly, if you're raising a family in the 70s, Knoxville's not a bad place to do it. Low crime, good schools, the Smoky Mountains right in your backyard. The Gibsons were a family of 6. Robert Sr., his wife Hope, the oldest Robert Jr., Everybody called him Bob, who was 18. He'd just gone off to the Navy boot camp in Florida. Then 16-year-old Trenny, 16, her younger sister Tina, 14, and the baby of the family, a boy named Miracle, who was 6 years old. They were religious. Calvary Baptist Tabernacle every Sunday and Wednesday night. Hope was deeply devout, the kind of woman who got up early to pray and study scripture before waking the kids for breakfast. So, like, seriously devout. Robert Sr. was a former Eagle Scout and a troop leader. He ran a strict household, structured. The kids didn't have a lot of freedom. Now, Trenny, she was 5'3", 115 pounds, brown hair, green eyes, quiet kid, not the loudest person in the room. That was her sister Tina. Trenny was more of a wallflower, but marched to the beat of her own drum. She loved music, especially the rock band Jethro Tull, and she was focused. The summer before she disappeared, Trenny got a job at Morrison's cafeteria in the local mall. She was 15 years old, and she worked hard enough to earn around $2,000. Think about what that means for a 15-year-old in 1976. And here's what she did with it. She put $1,000 in the savings account, she kept $200 in cash at home, and she treated herself to a $600 star sapphire diamond ring. The ring was important to her. She wore it every day. Remember that. We're going to circle back to that in a minute. Her father was so impressed by her discipline that he promised her a car for Christmas if she kept her grades up, and she was keeping them up. She was dreaming about studying landscape architecture at the University of Tennessee. That's why she signed up for Wayne Dunlap's horticulture class at Bearden High School. So let me be clear about something. This is a 16-year-old girl with a savings account, a plan for college, a ring she bought with her own money, and a car she was about to earn. Her brother Bob was coming home from the Navy soon, and she couldn't wait to see him. Bob later said, "Trenny and I have been close since we were real little. There's no way she'd go anywhere if she knew I was coming home. No way." So she didn't run away. That theory has never held water, and it never will. Now, it doesn't mean that everything in the home was perfect. That's important, because years later, after researchers started digging into the case, a more complicated picture of the Gibson household started to emerge. People who knew the family said things were tense in that house, even before Trenny vanished. Laura Reese, a Canadian researcher who spent over 20 years investigating the case, was told by multiple sources that Trenny was treated differently than her siblings, that she carried most of the household responsibilities. Word spread that people treated her as the maid. And then there's the part of Trenny's life that her parents didn't want anyone to know about, but we'll get to that. Put a pin in that for a moment, because we first need to talk about this field trip. It's a Thursday evening on October 1976. Trenny's in her horticulture class, and Mr. Dunlap, who's one of those energetic, spontaneous teachers that kids actually like, he tells the class that they're going on a field trip that very next day, tomorrow, Friday. No warning, and he won't tell them where they're going. So that probably sounds insane by today's standards. A teacher loading 38 kids on a bus without telling the parents the destination. In 2026, that gets you fired, canceled, probably doxxed, likely imprisoned. In 1976, apparently it gets you a round of applause because the kids went nuts. Trenny goes home and tells her father about it. Robert Sr., that's the former Eagle Scout, he actually sits down with her and goes over safety basics. How to find north by looking at moss on a tree, which plants are edible in an emergency. He's a thorough guy, but neither one of them is too worried because they look at the weather forecast and it's calling for rain. So they figure that the trip's probably going to get canceled. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Friday morning, October 8th, 1976. Now, Trenny wakes up and looks out the window. It's raining. So she figures there's no way that the field trip's happening. She doesn't get dressed for a hike. She puts on her blue jeans, a blue blouse, a blue and white striped sweater, her blue Adidas sneakers, and a star sapphire ring. No jacket, no coat, no hat. Her mother Hope drives her to school. When they pull into the parking lot, there's a bus sitting there. The trip's still on. Now, here's a detail that's going to matter later. Trenny takes her lunch, but leaves her books and her purse in her mother's car. Her purse has her identification and about $200 cash in it. She kisses her mom goodbye and walks towards the bus. Think about it. If you're a 16-year-old girl planning to run away from home, you don't leave your money and your ID in your mother's car, do you? On the bus, Mr. Dunlap finally reveals the destination. Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Kleeman's Dome. They're going to hike Forney Ridge Trail about 1.8 miles each way to a spot called Andrews Bald. They're going to observe trees, plants at different elevations. They'll write a paper about it over the weekend. The kids go crazy. Whistles, cheers, applause. It's a Friday, they're getting out of class and they're going into the mountains. Life is good. Dunlap gives them the rules. Stay on the trail. Be back by 3:30 p.m. That's it. Those are the rules. Just two. Now here's a question nobody asked at the time, but seems pretty significant now. Wayne Dunlap is the only adult on this trip. 38 teenagers and 1 teacher. Hope Gibson was originally supposed to come along as a second chaperone, but she couldn't find a babysitter for Miracle. The bus driver stayed with the bus, so once those kids hit the trail, it's Dunlap and nobody else. And there's another thing. Dunlap deliberately kept the destination a secret, and he didn't just do it for fun. He later told investigators the reason was that he wanted to make sure that nobody could follow the students there. Think about that. The teacher specifically designed his trip so that no outside group would know where they were going, and yet somebody who wasn't on their class roster showed up at the park anyway, in their own car. But that comes later. Trenny sits next to Robert Simpson on the bus. Simpson's a senior. He's 17 or 18, and he's her brother Bob's good friend. Before Bob left for boot camp, he asked Simpson to keep an eye on his little sister while he was gone. Look out for her, that kind of thing. It's cold and drizzling, and Trenny doesn't have a jacket, so Simpson offers her his. It's a brown and orange checkered CPO jacket, heavy wool plaid pattern. It's distinctive looking. You'd recognize it if you saw it. Trenny takes it. She gives him half her sandwich in return. They chat on the ride, and by all accounts, she appears in good spirits. The bus pulls into Klingman's Dome parking area around 12:30 p.m. 38 students pile out. Dunlap reminds everyone to have their jackets and be back by 3:30 p.m. And within minutes, they're on the trail. They're breaking into smaller groups based on how fast they walk, laughing, yelling, messing around. Normal teenagers on a Friday afternoon. Trenny and Robert Simpson hike to Andrews Bald together. It takes about an hour and a half. The trail's narrow and wet. There's steep drop-offs on both sides with dense undergrowth and thick fir trees. It's not the most dangerous hike in the Smokies, but if you step off that trail, the terrain gets pretty rough in a hurry. They reach Andrews Bald around 1:30 p.m. It's a grassy clearing at the top. That's why they call it the Bald. They sit down under a tree, and when it starts raining harder, they eat their lunch. Other students catch up, everything's normal. And then something happens between Trenny and Robert Simpson. And we don't know exactly what, nobody does, but whatever it was, it made Trenny want to leave. Because around 1:50 p.m., Trenny tells Simpson she's heading back to the bus. He says he's staying. His reason, the one he gave later, was that he was going to track a bear. Got that? You're a 17-year-old kid on a school field trip. It's raining, it's cold. You're in the Great Smoky Mountains, which absolutely does have black bears, and you're gonna go find one on foot, unarmed, alone, in the rain and fog. Right. Every single person who's ever investigated the case has flagged that story as ridiculous. Laura Reist flagged it. Michael Bouchard flagged it. The hosts of every podcast that's covered this case has said the same thing. It makes no sense. It's either the dumbest excuse in history of excuses, or it's a deliberate story designed to explain why Robert Simpson can't account for his movements for the next hour and a half. So Trenny leaves Andrews Bald alone, and Simpson stays behind. And from this point on, the only people who see Trenny Gibson alive are a handful of her classmates on the trail, and what they saw is strange. Trenny's moving fast, faster than everyone else. She catches up to a group of girls, Angela Beckner, Lisa Mickles, Bobby Coghill. Bobby starts walking with her, but Trenny's pace is intense. They link up with Scott Troy and Anita Rounds. The group wants to sit down, but Trenny won't stop. Bobby later said that she asked if anyone else was breathing hard, and Trenny said, yeah, everybody, but she wouldn't rest. She kept going. Now, they're about 3/4 of a mile from the bus. Anita Rounds is watching. Trenny walks ahead in the trail, and then Trenny stops. She bends down, looks to the right, steps off the trail. This is where we initially started the episode. David Estem comes up from behind, and Anita turns to look at him. When she turns back, Trenny's not there. That's around 2:50 p.m. That's the last confirmed sighting of Trenny Lynn Gibson. And the next day, in that exact spot where she stepped off the trail, searchers found something. A beer can, cigarette butts. A small area in the brush where grass had been pressed flat, like someone had been sitting there, waiting. Was somebody off that trail? Did Trenny see someone she recognized? Is that why she crouched down and turned right? Because here's the thing, Trenny smoked cigarettes, not regularly. She'd bum one here and there, but a beer can? On a school field trip in the woods? Somebody brought that beer to that spot, so somebody was sitting there. 40 minutes from now, the bus is supposed to leave, and Trenny Gibson's gone. 3:30 p.m., the students start filing back to the bus. Dunlap's doing a head count, 37. He counts again, 37. Trenny Gibson isn't here. Now, to Dunlap's credit, the guy moves fast. By 3:40, he grabs a student named Danny Johnson, and they split up. Danny hikes all the way back to Andrews Bald. Dunlap heads to Double Spring Shelter on the Appalachian Trail because somebody mentioned they saw sneaker prints that looked like Adidas tracks headed in that direction. At 4:06 p.m., Dunlap contacts the National Park Service by CB radio. A park ranger named Sammy responds and arrives at the parking lot by 4:30 p.m. They search Andrews Bald area. Nothing. He files an official report. Trenny Lynn Gibson is missing in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And there's something else. Shortly after 5 p.m., Dunlap puts the remaining 37 students on the bus and sends them back to Knoxville. He stays behind to help search. The bus rolls into Bearden High School that evening, and 37 kids get off. Hope Gibson's waiting for her daughter, and Trenny's not on the bus. But here's the kicker. Nobody calls Hope until around 8 or 8:30 that night. That's 5 full hours after Trenny disappeared. 5 hours before her mother finds out she's missing. Why is that? Why does it take 5 hours to pick up a phone? Now, Robert Gibson Sr. is coming home from a business trip. He races to the airport, gets home, grabs Hope. They drive to the park together, and they bring articles of Trenny's clothing for the dogs. That first night is brutal. It's the Smoky Mountains in October. The temperature drops to the low 30s. Strong winds, heavy rain, fog so thick you can't see 20 feet in front of you. Between 6:30 and 8 p.m., 19 searchers arrive, park rangers, volunteers. They fan out into the area around the trail with loudspeakers, whistles, calling Trenny's name. Nothing. Just wind, rain, and silence. They search until around 3 a.m., and then they have to stop. The conditions are too dangerous. Several searchers nearly got hurt on the wet terrain in the dark. Now, Saturday morning, October 9th, this is where it becomes a full-scale operation. Ranger Jack takes over as search coordinator. He shuts down the road from Clingman's Dome to Newfound Gap. No public traffic, only authorized rescue personnel. By dawn, search teams are assembling in the parking lot. And it's a big search team. German Shepherds, Bloodhounds, 6 different dog teams, 2 Army helicopters from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, National Guard choppers from both Tennessee and North Carolina. Dr. Robert Lash and his medical team from the University of Tennessee set up an on-site treatment station because this terrain is rough and enough of the searchers themselves are getting injured. The Red Cross shows up and starts serving 300 meals a day. They're working half-mile grids, every creek, every cliff, every drainage, every hollow. They push a 15-square-mile radius around Clingman's Dome, concentrating on the North Carolina side where Trenny was last seen. And the numbers keep climbing. Over the full search window from October 8th through November 2nd, 756 people searched for Trenny Gibson. 756. And you know what they found? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a shoe, not a bone, not a single physical trace of a 16-year-old girl. Unfortunately, the helicopters were basically useless. Fall was in full swing. A canopy of changing leaves, reds and oranges and golds made natural camouflage. And Trenny was wearing blue. A blue blouse, blue sweater, blue jeans, blue sneakers. Against that backdrop, from the air, she's invisible. But the dogs weren't useless. The dogs found plenty. Trenny's parents brought her recently worn clothes to the park so that the tracking teams could pick up the scent. And multiple teams, 3 separate dog units working independently, all hit the same trail. They picked up Trenny's scent at the spot where her classmates last saw her step off the Forney Ridge Trail. They followed it through the woods onto the Appalachian Trail. The scent passed through the concrete base of the Clingman's Dome observation tower. And here's an interesting detail that gets overlooked. There's a cavity at the base of the tower. It was not searched during the initial effort. Nobody looked in there. From the tower, the scent continued down the Appalachian Trail for about 1.5 miles until it reached a spot near Highway 441, close to an overflow parking area at Collins Gap. And there the trail went cold, right at the road. And here's the detail that seals it. Cigarette butts from the same brand found at the spot where Trenny stepped off the trail were also found at this endpoint near the road. Same brand, both locations, just like a trail of breadcrumbs. So what does this tell us? It tells us somebody was at both spots, somebody who smokes, somebody who was at the point where Trenny left the trail, and the point where she got into a vehicle. By October 14th, park rangers made a public statement. They said they didn't believe Trenny Gibson was in the park. The FBI agreed. The search continued through the end of October just to be thorough, and a renewed search went out in April of 1977 after the snow melted. They covered the same ground, but same result. Zilch. Ranger Jack, the guy who coordinated the entire thing, told the press that the Park Service would never technically give up the search, and he meant it. To this day, anyone working in the area of the park is told to keep their eyes open. But let's be honest about what the evidence says. Trenny Gibson didn't die of exposure on Forney Ridge Trail. She didn't fall from a cliff into a ravine. She wasn't attacked by a bear. Experts told the Gibsons that even an extremely hungry bear that consumed a person would leave traces of clothing in its feces, and nothing like that was ever found. 3 dog teams say that she walked to a road and then the scent stopped. The FBI says that she left the park. So the question changes. It's not where did she get lost, it's who was waiting at that road. So let's talk about the suspects, because this case has a few of them. We're going to go through each one. But here's a name that keeps coming up over and over for 49 years. In every newspaper article, every podcast, every blog post, every researcher's notes, it's the name Trenny's own mother pointed to from the very beginning. Robert Simpson Jr. Now, we've already talked about who Simpson was on the surface. Senior at Bearden High School, Bob Gibson's buddy, a guy who sat next to Trenny on the bus and loaned her his jacket, the last person known to have been alone with her before she vanished. But there's a lot more to Robert Simpson than that, and to understand how deep this goes, you gotta understand his family. Specifically his father. Robert Simpson Sr. was the Assistant United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Tennessee. That's not a small job, that's a federal prosecutor. It's a man with the power to write warrants, an authority over cases on federal land. And guess what qualifies as federal land? Every square inch of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So when Trenny Gibson disappears from that park and investigators start looking at the prosecutor's son, you can already see the problem. The fox isn't just in the henhouse. The fox's dad built the henhouse. Now let's walk through what Robert Simpson did in the days after Trenny vanished. Not what he said, but what he did. First, he shows up at the Gibson family's house. While Hope and Robert Sr. are at the park searching for their daughter, Simpson lets himself in. Trenny's 14-year-old sister Tina is there, and Simpson starts answering the phone. He's screening the calls from the press and the police. Nobody asked him to do this. Nobody invited him. He just shows up and takes over the family's phone line when they're gone. It's strange. Why? What kind of 17 or 18-year-old kid inserts himself into the communications hub of a missing girl's family? What calls was he intercepting, and what messages did he take or not take? And while he's there, he says something to Tina that's been quoted in almost every account of this case. He tells her if Kelvin Bowman has Trenny, he'll kill her. If he doesn't have her, I think she might have run off with some horny hitchhiker. It's a curious statement. He's offering exactly 2 possibilities to a 14-year-old girl, and neither one of them involves himself. He's already building a narrative. It was Kelvin, or she ran away. Pick one. Second, his father, the assistant U.S. attorney, counsels his son not to speak to investigators. Don't answer questions. He tells him not to cooperate with the FBI or the Park Service or anyone. And Simpson, for his part, doesn't. He just doesn't talk. The Gibsons went to both the National Park Service and the FBI. They told them about Simpson, about the comb, the phone calls, the behavior, and the FBI's response. The actual response to the family, whose 16-year-old daughter vanished from federal land, was that Robert Simpson was too young to question. He was 17 or 18, old enough to drive, old enough to be tried as an adult in plenty of jurisdictions, but somehow too young for the FBI to even talk to. Now here's the thing. Laura Reist spent 20 plus years on this case, and she's talked to a lot of former Bearden students. A lot. And she's convinced that Simpson had what she describes as almost sociopathic behavior in the aftermath. The showing up at the house, the screening of the calls, the inserting himself into the investigation, the returning to the search area. These aren't the behaviors of a guilty person trying to hide, the behaviors of someone who's showing off, who's daring people to catch him, who knows he's protected. And then he goes further. The day after Trenny disappears, Simpson is back at the park. He says he's helping search, but he's not alone. He's got a friend with him, a guy named Gary Nichols, and the two of them are wandering around the search area. Now, we'll get deeper into Gary Nichols later because he deserves his own segment. But for now, just know this. Nichols wasn't on the field trip roster. He wasn't in the horticulture class. He drove to the park on his own, and the day after the girl disappears, he and Simpson are out there together playing search party. Curious. Now, at some point during the search, Simpson runs into Trenny's grandmother at the Sugarlands Visitor Center. That's where the Gibson family was staging, waiting for news. Trenny's grandmother asks Simpson directly, "Where were you when Trenny disappeared?" And that's when he blurts out, "I was tracking a bear. Hope Gibson later said that he shot out of the room like a cannon after he said it. It's kind of curious. If your friend's little sister went missing in the woods and you had absolutely nothing to do with it, what would you do? Would you cooperate? Answer questions? Would you try to talk to police so that you could help? Robert Simpson did the opposite of all that. He refused to cooperate. His father made sure he didn't have to. And while the Gibson family was falling apart, while Hope was at the park praying for her daughter, Simpson was in her house answering her phone. He died in 2022. He was never charged. He was never formally questioned. And whatever he knew about what happened to Trenny Gibson on October 8th, 1976, he took it with him. But there's physical evidence we haven't gotten to yet. And it's the kind of evidence that, if this case happened today, would have ended it in a week. We already mentioned the scratches and the jacket, but now we need to talk about them in detail, because the scratches and the jacket are the two pieces of evidence that tells you everything. That's next. After Trenny vanishes, her brother Bob gets emergency leave from Navy boot camp in Florida. He flies home to Knoxville, and the person who picks him up at the airport, Robert Simpson. Think about that. According to Hope Gibson, Bob and Simpson were never really close friends. Other accounts say they were, so it's murky at best. But either way, why is Robert Simpson the one collecting Trenny's brother from the airport? Why not a family member? Why not literally anyone else? On the drive home, Bob notices something on the dashboard of Simpson's car. It's Trenny's comb, her personal comb. The one Hope said Trenny carried every single day. She never left the house without it, always had it in her jeans pocket, and here it is, sitting on Robert Simpson's dashboard. Bob says something about it, and Simpson plays it off. Oh, I was just holding it for her, something to that effect. Casual, no big deal. But how? When? Trenny was wearing his jacket on the field trip, remember? If the comb was in her jeans pocket where Hope says she always kept it, how did it end up in Simpson's car? His car wasn't at the park that day. He rode the bus like everyone else. So at some point between October 8th and whenever he picked up Bob, the comb moved from Trenny's possession to Simpson's dashboard. Nobody's ever explained how. Now, they get back to the Gibson house. It's late. Simpson decides to stay the night, and this is where it gets really uncomfortable. They're getting ready for bed. Simpson takes off his pants, and Bob sees deep scratch marks running vertically down Simpson's thighs. They extend all the way to his knees. It's not a scrape. Real deep scratches, long vertical parallel scratches running down his legs. Bob tells his family as soon as he can. The Gibsons tell authorities, and you already know what happened next. Nothing. So let's talk about what those scratches actually mean, because Simpson had an explanation, remember? He said he got them walking through the thick brush in the national park while searching for Trenny. And that sounds almost reasonable until you think about it for 5 seconds. If you're walking through dense undergrowth, the branches and the thorns hit you across the legs horizontally, side to side, because you're moving forward and the brush is raking across your path. That's how brush works. These scratches were vertical, top to bottom, straight down. And here's the other thing. Simpson always wore heavy work pants, the kind that can take a beating. And those pants, no tears, no marks, no corresponding damage at all. Means whatever made those scratches, it wasn't going through his pants to get there. It happened when his pants were off. Laura Reist obtained a photograph of Trenny's fingernails from around the time she disappeared. She described them as long and sharp enough to scratch through sheetrock. Michael Bouchard's theory, and this is the one that fits the physical evidence, is that Simpson assaulted Trenny at or near Andrew's bald sexually, and she fought back hard. She raked him with her fingernails from his groin down to his knees. That's why she left in such a hurry. That's why she was walking like she was on a mission. She was getting away from him, and then Simpson caught up with her. He knew the park. He'd been there multiple times before. He was familiar with the terrain. Bouchard believes Simpson cut through the woods on a path that he already knew, got ahead of Trenny, and intercepted her near the spot where she stepped off the trail. And here's one more thing about Simpson that night at the Gibson house. He takes his pants off in front of Bob, in front of the missing girl's brother. He knows those scratches are there. He knows what they look like, and he does it anyway. Reist calls it sociopathic. An in-your-face display, the kind of thing someone does when they want to relive it. They're daring you to figure it out because they know nothing's going to happen to them. Now, the jacket. This is the piece of evidence that didn't surface until almost 50 years later. It might be the most important one. In 2024, cold case investigator Michael Bouchard was doing research for his book on Trenny's case. He was going through old newspaper photographs from the search, the ones taken the days immediately after Trenny disappeared. In one of those photos, he spotted something. Robert Simpson in the park during the search, and he's wearing a brown and orange checkered CPO jacket. It's the same jacket he loaned Trenny that morning on the bus, the jacket she was wearing when she vanished. Bouchard showed the photograph to Hope Gibson. She said it was the same coat she saw her daughter wearing when she dropped her off at school that morning. It's the same one Simpson told her that he loaned to Trenny. So let's lay this out real simple. Trenny borrows Simpson's jacket on the bus. She's wearing it all day. She's wearing it when her classmates see her for the last time on Forney Ridge Trail. She disappears. And the next day, Simpson has his jacket back. He's wearing it in the park while pretending to search for a girl who's wearing it when she went missing. How did he get it back? WTF? There are only two possibilities. Either Trenny gave it back to him before she vanished, which nobody saw happen and no witnesses ever corroborated, or Simpson had contact with Trenny after she was last seen alive. And there's a nasty bonus to this. Simpson's walking all over the park wearing a jacket that has Trenny's scent on it. She wore it all day. Her scent is saturated into that thing. And now Simpson's out there creating false scent trails everywhere he goes with 3 teams of dogs trying to track where Trenny went. Bouchard argues in his book that Simpson's scent trail and Trenny's scent trail were hopelessly tangled by the time the dogs went to work. Maybe that's why the trail ended at the road. Maybe the dogs didn't follow Trenny into the parking lot. They followed the jacket. Or maybe both trails led to the same place because maybe Simpson walked Trenny to the road. Either way, a man who won't cooperate with investigators, whose father is shielding him from questioning, who has a missing girl's comb on his dashboard, fingernail scratches down his legs, and whose jacket is on his back the day after she disappears. In 2026, that's an arrest. In 1976, with the right daddy, it's a free pass. For decades, the working theory was that if Simpson did something to Trenny, he did it alone. One guy, one victim, end of story. But Laura Reese never bought it. She kept saying the same thing over and over in her podcasts, on her blog, in her interviews. There had to be somebody else. Somebody with a car. Because here's the math. Simpson rode the bus to the park. He didn't drive. So if Trenny left the park in a vehicle and the dogs say that she did, then whose vehicle was it? Simpson couldn't have driven her out. He didn't have a car there. So somebody else did. For years, that was just a theory, a logical inference. Nobody had a name. Then Michael Bouchard got the FBI file. We should talk about how that happened because it's a story in itself. Reese tried to get the FBI file through the Freedom of Information Act. She was denied. The Gibson family tried. They were denied. Bouchard tried 10, maybe 12 times through standard FOIA, denied every time. And he tried something different. There's a legal mechanism called an exclusionary rule that provides a separate pathway to obtain federal records. Bouchard used it before on the Dennis Martin case, another Smokies disappearance, so we applied it to the Trenny's file on the last attempt, and he got it. Now, the FBI didn't hand over everything. They released what they figured the public should see and held back what they didn't want out there. Reese and Bouchard both believe that the redacted portions are everything that would implicate the FBI itself or Simpson Sr. in obstructing the investigation. But what they did release was enough, because in those files was a name that appeared twice in the National Park Service report that nobody connected to the field trip itself until the FBI file revealed that he wasn't supposed to be there. Gary Nichols, senior at Bearden High, same year as Simpson, part of the same crowd. The kids who hung out outside smoking pot between classes. He and Simpson knew each other well. But here's the thing about Gary Nichols. He was not in Wayne Dunlap's horticulture class. He was not a student on the roster for the field trip on October 8th. He wasn't on that bus. He had no reason to be anywhere near the park that day. And yet he was in the park. In his own car. Now remember, Dunlap kept his destination secret specifically so that nobody could follow the students there. He told investigators that that was the whole point. So either somebody on that bus told Nichols where they were going, or Nichols followed the bus from the school parking lot. Either way, Gary Nichols drove to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park on October 8th, 1976 on his own volition with no legitimate reason to be there, and he brought a car. After Trenny disappeared, Nichols and Simpson were both seen in the park during the search. Together. The accounts describe them as making a nuisance of themselves, just hanging around, milling about, being present. And here's where Nichols did something that should have set off alarms in the building. He told people that he was on the field trip, and he claimed he saw Trenny just before she went missing, and that she appeared happy and unbothered. Everything was fine. Nothing to worry about. But his name isn't on the roster. He wasn't on the bus. His entire statement is fabricated. He's constructing a narrative. Trenny was fine. Trenny was happy. Nothing's wrong. And he's doing it as someone who had no business being in that park in the first place. So what's Reese's theory? Well, it goes like this. Something happens between Simpson and Trenny at Andrews Bald. An assault. She fights back. The scratches. She breaks free, starts heading back towards the bus fast. Simpson catches up with her somehow, cuts through the woods, intercepts her near the spot where she steps off the trail, and then, Whatever happens, happens. But Simpson's got a problem. He's on the bus, and he's got to get back to the parking lot by 3:30, or people are going to notice that he's missing too. He can't move a body and make it back in time. That's where Nichols comes in. He's the cleanup crew. He's got a vehicle at or near the overflow parking lot near Collins Gap, the exact spot where the dogs lost the scent. The window of opportunity is between roughly 3:30 p.m. when Dunlap realizes Trenny's gone, and 6:30 p.m. when the first wave of NPS searchers arrive. Now, during that gap, the only people actively looking are Dunlap, one student, and one ranger. They're searching the trails, they're watching the roads. If Nichols could get Trenny into his car during that window, he's out. He drives out of the park and nobody sees a thing. Reese put it plainly, I think Gary was the cleanup crew. She thinks the scent trail supports this. The dogs tracked Trenny to Collins Gap. It's a small parking area near the road. That's exactly where you'd park if you wanted access to an area without being noticed in the main lot. So what happened to Gary Nichols? Well, he died in 2009. He was only 50. His obituary is sparse. It mentions a couple of sisters and a dog, no partners or children. The sisters won't respond to Reese's inquiries. People who knew him later in life told Reese that he was quite a liar. Not the word pathological, but the implication was clear. He embellished, he built himself up, told stories that weren't true. Sound familiar? Both Simpson and Nichols are now dead. Simpson Sr. is dead. The three people who Reese and Bouchard believe were most directly responsible for Trenny's disappearance and the cover-up that followed are gone, and none of them ever faced a single question under oath. But they're not the only suspects in the case, because long before anyone was looking for Simpson or Nichols, the Gibson family had a different name in mind, a name that got thrown around from day one, a name that was convenient, maybe too convenient. His name was Kelvin Bowman, and the story the Gibson family told about him, the story Kelvin tells about himself, are two very different things. From the moment Trenny disappeared, one name kept getting pushed to the front of the line, Kelvin Bowman. And if all you had was the Gibson family's version of events, you'd probably think that he did it too, because the story is terrifying. According to Hope Gibson, about a year before Trenny vanished, October 11th, 1975, a young man named Kelvin Bowman broke into the Gibson home. Hope said he was the only adult there. Robert Sr. was away on business. She saw someone skulking across the front lawn heading towards their house. She grabbed her gun, stood in the bathtub, and looked out the window. The intruder went through a window and he fell 5 feet to a concrete floor. Hope shot him in the foot. In the family's telling, Bowman was obsessed with Trenny, a stalker. He'd been fixated on her and he was attempting to break in, maybe an attempted abduction. Hope said he refused to leave even after being shot. She said she spared his life because he was somebody's son and he was drunk out of his mind. Kelvin was arrested, charged. He was sentenced to time in a juvenile correctional facility. And according to Hope, while he was in court, he made threats against Trenny's life. He served about 6 months, got out, and Knox County Public Schools, and a decision that defies all logic, put him right back in the same school as the girl he allegedly threatened to kill. So when Trenny vanishes from a field trip a year later, Kelvin Bowman is suspect number 1 for the Gibson family. Some students even claim that they saw a car following the school bus that day. The family was convinced Kelvin tailed the bus to the Smokies, waited for his chance, then grabbed her. Robert Simpson pushed this theory as well. Remember what he told Tina? If Kelvin Bowman has Trenny, he'd kill her. Curious. Here's the problem with all that, though. First, Kelvin Bowman didn't own a car, so the following the bus theory collapses on its own. Second, and this is definitive, Principal Frank Hall of Bearden High School confirmed that Kelvin Bowman was in class all day on October 8th, 1976. So he was at school all day. He has an alibi verified by the principal himself. So he didn't do it. He couldn't have. He was sitting in a classroom in Knoxville while Trenny was vanishing 90 minutes away in the mountains. But here's where it gets even more complicated, because decades later, Michael Bouchard actually tracked Kelvin Bowman down and interviewed him. And Kelvin's version of the break-in is completely different from what the Gibson family told everybody. Kelvin says there was no stalking, no obsession, and definitely no attempted abduction. He says Trenny and he were dating, secretly, for months. And the reason it was secret was because Kelvin was black. And the Gibsons were a conservative white family in 1970s Knoxville. An interracial relationship in that household, in that era, wasn't something you want to put on a Christmas card. According to Kelvin, Trenny would leave her bedroom window open for him on specific nights each week. He'd climb in, they'd spend time together, he'd leave. They'd been doing this for quite a while. On the night in question, Kelvin says he came over, probably drunk. He admits that much. He picked the wrong window. He went through Bob's window instead of Trenny's. There was no furniture to break the fall. He dropped 5 feet onto the concrete floor and Hope shot him. Neighbors saw Kelvin limping down the road after the shooting, so he eventually left. clearly. He walked home with a bullet in his foot, and he didn't even go to the hospital until the next day when the alcohol wore off. And the bullet turned out to be too close to the bone in the arteries. Doctors couldn't remove it. Kelvin Bowman carried that bullet in his foot for the rest of his life. Laura Reist raised a point that nobody else seemed to think about here. If Kelvin was sneaking into Trenny's room on a regular basis for months, he would have known which window was hers. The fact that he picked the wrong one could mean that he'd never actually been there before. Could mean it was his first attempt. Or it could mean that he was as drunk as he said and it was just a mistake. But there's one more detail. Trenny wasn't just seeing Kelvin. Bouchard and Reist learned that before Kelvin, Trenny was dating another young man named Derek Scott, a basketball player, also black. Her father caught her sitting with Derek in his car, and that was the end of that. So, Trenny Gibson, the shy, quiet girl from the strict religious household, had a private life her parents either didn't know about or didn't want to acknowledge. And Reist believes that the family's insistence that Trenny never dated and had no interest in boys was a deliberate cover. It's a version of their daughter that protected the family's image. None of which means Kelvin did anything to Trenny on October 8th. He didn't. He was in school, remember? He didn't have a car. And every time his name gets thrown into the case, it pulls attention in the wrong direction. Kelvin knew it too. He told Bouchard that he understood from the first moment Trenny went missing that he'd be the first person they'd look at. After the break-in, after the shooting, after the juvenile detention, anything that happened to Trenny Gibson, Kelvin Bowman was going to wear it. And that's exactly what Robert Simpson was counting on. A ready-made suspect. A kid with a record and a history with the victim. In 1976 Tennessee, that's all you needed. Point the finger at Kelvin and nobody looks at you. And it almost worked. For a lot of people, it did work. For decades. But Kelvin Bowman didn't take Trenny Gibson. And the people who actually know what happened were never in the courtroom. They were at a basketball game. They were wearing a stolen ring and answering phones in a missing girl's house. And one of them was sitting in the smoking pit at Bearden High with a kid named Gary Nichols planning God knows what. So we covered Simpson, we covered Nichols, we covered Kelvin, but there's another thread in this case that's been dangling for 49 years, and no one's been able to tie it off. Trenny's jewelry. Remember that star sapphire diamond ring? The one she bought with the money she earned at Morrison's cafeteria? $600. In 1976, that's about $3,400 today. She wore it every day. She was wearing it on October 8th. After Trenny disappeared, the ring turned up on the finger of a classmate, a girl named Robin. Robin's story was that Trenny gave her the ring to hold during the hike, just handed it over for safekeeping. No explanation for why. And after Trenny vanished, Robin just kept it. She told the Gibson family she'd return it, but she never did. Robert Simpson had a different version. He said Trenny took the ring off in the washroom and gave it to a different girl, a girl named Tina Mays, to hold it for her. Tina Mays said that never happened. She never had the ring, never touched it. So we've got two conflicting stories about how Robin ended up with Trenny's most prized possession, and neither one checks out. Robin says Trenny gave it to her. Simpson says Trenny gave it to someone else entirely, and that someone else says it's all a lie. But there's a third version, and it's the darkest one. Years after the disappearance, some former Bearden High students started talking amongst themselves. What filtered out through Laura Reist's research was that there was an altercation on the trail that day. A small group of classmates confronted Trenny. They grabbed her, took her ring. Trenny slipped out of Simpson's jacket while they were trying to hold on to her, and she ran off into the woods. Who was in this group? Nobody's confirmed that. How did it start? Nobody's confirmed that either. But if it's true, even partially, it means Trenny wasn't just dealing with Robert Simpson that day, she was dealing with multiple people. And it means the jacket came off before she vanished, which would explain how Simpson got it back. Hope Gibson had something to say about Robin and the ring. She told Reist that the girl who ended up with the jewelry died young, early 40s. Hope said something to the effect of, I don't know if karma had something to do with it or what. Now here's what really bothers me about the ring. It's not just that Robin had it, it's that nobody in any position of authority seems to have cared. A 16-year-old girl vanishes. Her $600 ring shows up on a classmate's hand. The classmate's story doesn't match the only other account of how she got it, and the girl who supposedly received it from Trenny says it never happened. That's evidence. In any competent investigation, you sit Robin down and you don't let her leave until she tells you exactly how she got that ring on her finger. You check it for prints. You check it for DNA. Well, maybe not in 1976, but you preserve it. You document the chain of possession. None of that happened here. And the ring is just the most visible piece of a bigger problem, because Laura Reist didn't just talk to Robin, she talked to a lot of former Bearden students, a lot of them. And her conclusion after 20 years of digging is that a small group of people at that school know exactly what happened to Trenny Gibson. Now, not the whole school or even the whole class, I'm talking about a small group. Some of them who were on the trail that day, some of them were not, but they know. And in half a century, not one of them has broken. Think about that. Not one. So let's talk about what happened to everyone. Wayne Dunlap, the teacher, was deeply affected by what happened. He resigned from Bearden High not long after. The guy took 38 kids into the mountains and brought back 37, whether it was his fault or not. And honestly, most people who've looked at this case don't blame him. That's not something you can recover from. He cooperated fully with investigators. He searched for Trenny himself that first night. He did what he could, but in the end, he was one adult supervising 38 teenagers in a national park, and it wasn't enough. The Gibson family fell apart. Hope and Robert Sr. divorced in the mid-80s. Robert remarried twice. Hope remarried too. Her second husband died in 1993. She eventually married again, became Hope Gibson Collins, and moved to West Virginia. She and her new husband ran a ministry for prisoners. Robert Sr. never stopped looking. He checked with religious organizations in New York that had reputations for hiding young people. He traveled the country talking to crime experts. He visited prisons, posing as a relative to get information from inmates who claimed to know something. Every lead turned out to be a hoax. The consensus among the experts he consulted was grim. They told him Trenny was likely abducted by 2 or 3 men, taken out of the park, sexually assaulted, and killed. Bob Gibson Jr., Trenny's brother, the one she couldn't wait to see come home from the Navy, the one who found the comb and saw the scratches, he died of natural causes in December of 2000. He was young, way too young, and never got the answers about his sisters. Tina lives in Tennessee. Miracle, the youngest, lives there too. Robert Gibson Sr. eventually settled in Ohio. He married a 3rd time. And Hope spent the rest of her life doing 2 things: serving God and waiting. In 1998, she wrote something for the book Unsolved Disappearances in the Great Smoky Mountains that I think every person watching should hear. She wrote, "Never for a moment after the 3rd day of the search for Trenny have I thought that she was lost in the mountains. She knew it from day 3. She knew her daughter didn't wander off and die in the woods. She knew something was done to her." Now let's talk about the institution that failed Trenny Gibson, because it wasn't just one person, it was a system. The FBI entered the case on October 12, 1976. They had the resources and jurisdiction. They had a family handing them a suspect on a platter, a suspect with a comb, scratches, a jacket, unexplained behavior, and a father with every reason and every ability to shut the investigation down. And that's exactly what happened. Remember, Robert Simpson Jr., as the Assistant United States Attorney, had the power to make things happen. Authority over federal land, professional relationships with every agent tasked with investigating his son. And when the Gibson family came to the FBI with their suspicions, they were told Simpson Jr. was too young to question. The FBI has never released its full file on Trenny Gibson's disappearance. What came out confirmed Simpson as the primary person of interest and revealed Nichols' presence. What stayed sealed, some believe, is anything that shows how deep the obstruction went. Anything that makes the Bureau look complicit. And maybe they are, because here's the thing. If a federal prosecutor's son is credibly suspected in the disappearance of a 16-year-old girl from federal land, and the investigation goes nowhere, and the file stays sealed for half a century, what are you supposed to think? I mean, at some point, common sense comes in. There was a new search ordered in 1981. Some accounts say President Carter authorized it. They went back in, covered the same ground, found nothing. In April 1977, 25 rangers searched a 2-mile radius near Klingham's Dome for a week, found nothing. That's where it stands. Officially an open case, practically a dead one. Robert Simpson Jr. died 2022, never charged, never questioned under oath. Gary Nichols died 2009 at 50, never charged. Simpson Jr. died before both of them. And just like resource Jim from Kingsport predicted, things only started loosening up after the old man was gone. The book came out. The partial FBI file came out. Names that have been whispered for decades got said out loud for the first time. But Trenny's still missing. Reese thinks that she might be buried on the Simpson property. Others think that she's somewhere in the park. Some suggest she's in Fontana Lake. But in truth, nobody knows for certain. And all that's left is a plaque beneath a tree at Bearden High School. Her classmates planted it in her memory. It's been there for decades, quiet and mostly forgotten, just like the case itself. Until now. Because here's what I want to leave you with. A girl at a basketball game told a stranger that Trenny was dead within a half an hour of disappearing. A classmate wore Trenny's ring and never gave it back. A group of students know something and have kept quiet for 49 years. And a cold case investigator from Connecticut had to use an obscure legal mechanism to pry open the FBI file that should have been made public decades ago. The case isn't unsolvable, it's unsolved. There's a difference. The evidence is there, the names are there, the pieces fit. What's missing is the one thing that's been missing since October 8th of 1976. Someone willing to talk. If you were at Bearden High School in the fall of 1976, if you were on that field trip, if you were in the smoking pit, if you were at the basketball game, if you know anything about what happened to Trenny Lynn Gibson, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's number is 615-744-4000. It's been 49 years. I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. Thanks for watching.